everyone, it's me, Tim, and today I'm going to be answering a question from Mark Bader. He asked me what type of items do I cheap out on and what type of items do I spend more money on. I think this is a really great question and I have some pretty good tips for you in this video, so stick around. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the things that I cheap out on first. These are just pieces of gear that I don't think it's worth investing a ton of money in. Number one is sunglasses. Mine always get scratched or they get lost or they break. So I rarely ever spend more than like $10 or $15 on sunglasses. So that's definitely something you can get away with cheaping out on and not having to sacrifice anything. And honestly, the quality of cheap sunglasses is pretty decent anyway. Number two, this is going to kind of maybe be a little controversial of an idea, but I think that you can cheap out on your sleeping pad for camping. The reason I say this, I've tried a bunch of sleeping pads, and don't get me wrong, the really expensive ones are pretty comfortable, but I've been using this one from Amazon called Sleep and Go, and it's like 20 something bucks, and it's really comfortable and easy to inflate, and it just works fine. You know, it doesn't necessarily hold a candle compared to like the Sea to Summit Comfort Plus SI. It's not as comfortable as that, but it's pretty comfortable, and I think it's definitely reasonable to cheap out on that item. Number two, this is if I was to buy this item again, I would cheap out on it. However, I do have a pretty expensive one right now, and I'm really happy with it, but I would definitely say you can cheap out on your camping chair. I've used all kinds of camping chairs. I've used the Marchway cheap one. I've used the Helinox more expensive one. Now currently I'm using the Mulebex, which I really like, and it's really comfortable and sturdy. But honestly, the cheap ones do just as good. So I think this is definitely an item you can cheap out on. Number four is a flashlight. I just bought a cheap flashlight headlamp off of Amazon. It was about 20-25 bucks. It's rechargeable. You really don't notice much of a difference between a cheap one and an expensive one. I just don't think it's necessary to buy a super expensive headlamp for motorcycle camping. And the last thing that I cheap out on is a footprint for the tent. Footprints for tents, especially more expensive tents, are really expensive. They're really pricey, but you can get a decent 8x10 tarp from Amazon or Walmart, and it's honestly probably even more durable and rugged than the footprint you would get with your tent. So that's definitely something you can cheap out on and save a little bit of money there. Okay, now as far as things that I will spend more money on, that I think is worth investing extra cash in. And number one, this is kind of funny, but it's actually socks. I've been using the Darn Tough socks. They're a little pricey. They're like $25 a pair, but they last forever. They're made out of wool. You can wear them a couple days without them starting to stink, which is really nice if you're on the road for an extended period of time. You can get away with like 2 or 3 days of wearing the same socks before you have to wash them. So definitely check out Darn Tough socks. I've been really happy with mine. I have like 4 or 5 pairs of them now. I've been slowly buying them over the last few years when I can afford to, and you definitely notice a difference from the cheap cotton socks to the Darn Tough socks. Number two is a motorcycle helmet. If I was buying all new gear from scratch, I would spend the most amount of money I could afford on a helmet and then spend what I have left on a riding jacket, boots, pants, gloves, that kind of stuff. But the helmet is really the most important thing for several reasons. One, obviously for safety. You want the safest helmet you can possibly afford, but also more expensive helmets are typically more comfortable, they're quieter, they just have better features, and I definitely think it's worth investing extra cash in a good helmet. Number three, the third thing that I don't cheap out on is my sleeping bag. I think that really has a lot to do with your comfort around camp. I'm using right now a quilt. It's like a convertible quilt. It can turn into a sleeping bag. It is super warm, it packs light. I really love the design of it, and it is a little bit pricey, but totally worth it in my opinion. And it's from a company called Zen Bivy. It's not actually a bivy, that's just the name of the company. I've done a review on it. I'm really happy with it and definitely highly recommend it if you're in the market for a sleeping bag. Number 4 thing that I won't cheap out on is tires for the motorcycle. I think this is kind of self-explanatory, but that is your connection to the ground. That is the thing that keeps you from sliding down the road on your butt. So I think it's worth investing in more expensive tires that maybe last a little bit longer. They're going to be safer, have better design and grip, and it's just not something that you really want to mess around with. So I don't see a lot of benefit to cheaping out on tires. That's my opinion anyway. And number 5 thing that I won't cheap out on is a stove. There are some pretty decent, really small, ultra lightweight backpacking stoves that are pretty cheap, and those are decent, but you're a little bit limited with what you can do with it. For me personally, I really love the Jetboil Flash. It's a little pricey. I think it's about $100, but it boils water super fast. I mean, it's really efficient. So that is a really nice option. And then another stove that I have is the Primus Express Spider Stove. I think that's what it's called. And that one there was also pretty expensive, but it does really good at like cooking more fancier stuff. So you can simmer with it, you can fry stuff. It's got a really good temperature control, and the price of it definitely shows. I think it's justified. And one more bonus thing that I will always spend money on when I'm on a motorcycle trip, this is kind of a bonus item, is I will always have money to stop at a coffee shop and get a good espresso. That is something I'll cheap out in other places, but I always make sure I have money to go to a nice coffee shop. That's just one of the things that I enjoy about traveling on a motorcycle, is trying out different cafes. So I always make sure that I have a little bit of extra money for that in the budget for a trip. So anyways, those are the 5 things that I cheap out on, and the 5 things that I like to splurge and spend a little extra on. Thanks again to Mark Vader for coming up with the idea for this video. I think this was really cool. I had fun putting this list together. Really made me think too, you know, what items could you cheap out on if you were on a tight budget and you wanted to get out and get going on a motorcycle trip. So hopefully that gave you some ideas. Maybe leave down in the comments if you agree or disagree with any of my ideas, or if you have any additional suggestions. I'm sure that would be helpful to everyone else too. Anyways, that is it for today. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Ride safe.